I need to produce great ideas, and I believe that if I were commissioned to design a new universe, I would be mad enough to undertake it.
Transparency and trust in Gen AI recreation is only gained to the degree that the complete creative process is understood, from input to output. Interpretation of historic visuals for today's viewer. How far can we go? And how to gain insights in AI's working. Piranesi's creative freedom in perspective construction has already been explored sufficiently in research. For this first part of the exploration, the focus therefore shifts to a specific spatial conflict in this etching, the green area. On the left side, this green area appears to be in front of the bluish wall. On the right side, however, it appears to move behind it. For generative AI, this creates an enormous challenge, especially when the image is not only reproduced, but also animated. The system has to define a spatial solution that works over time. This creates the danger that the AI reproduction is no longer an exact reconstruction. It may become an interpretation, or, in some details, perhaps even a free invention. Exploring how generative AI interprets images, this documentation takes a moment to look at optical illusions. These findings need to be reproduced again and again, because new models are constantly being released, often with different training. In this first example, different models showed a bias toward one reading or the other. This can be based on training, but also on the seed, which may lead the result in one direction or another. A single prompt is therefore not enough to gain reliable insight. If the model recognizes a specific optical illusion, even slight changes in the image may still lead to a predefined or learned result. The generated images were morphed into an animation to show these changes slowly. An interesting result appeared across all tested AI systems. None of them recognized the old woman in the provided image. Even when the prompt hinted that an old woman was present, the model turned the young woman into an older woman instead. In total, 20 image generations were explored. Representative key images were used to create this time-lapse style sequence. The classic optical illusion shown here is the three-end bow. It is impossible to solve if the object has to become part of a coherent 3D animation. This already became visible during image generation. In the morphing between the different results, the struggle to find a stable solution becomes clear. Generative AI is often based on millions of information points, organized across hundreds or even thousands of dimensions. Each prompt tries to find a solution inside this large field of data. If the drawing is internally in conflict, the results will often reveal that conflict. In perspective construction, parallel lines visually meet at infinity. Based on my explorations, this does not seem to be a real internal concept for generative AI. ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini all agree that the internal representation of a scene is typically not a 3D model in the way we know it from 3D applications such as Cinema 4D. Typically, when another object is rotated and is no longer parallel, additional vanishing points are created. A method based on three-point perspective may therefore contain 6, 9, 12, or even more vanishing points. Piranesi used this, but more importantly, he used several different viewpoints. It is almost as if the foreground was drawn from one viewpoint, the midground from another, and the background from yet another. Here, this idea is simplified with two cubes. A more technical aspect is the progression of scale in depth. This can be constructed correctly, or it can be used creatively, sometimes even deliberately incorrectly. In many cases, this is done for artistic intention. Hogarth created this deliberately wrong perspective as a book cover, making very clear how quickly perspective can fail when its rules are misunderstood or ignored. For further exploration, the works of de Chirico or M.C. Escher could be tested with different generative AI systems. However, for this documentary, no image licenses were granted, so their works are not shown here directly. De Chirico's work would be especially interesting in this context. Which brings us back to the staircase wall problem. This impossible part of the etching alone may already be enough to create many variations in the resulting gray model of the image. The question a documentarist needs to ask is whether the result is an exact reconstruction, an interpretation, or even a free invention. Another question is how far such a result can be used to translate the original work into a presentation for a present-day audience. Every image a viewer explores is filtered through memory, impression, and other influences. For people in 18th century Rome, Piranesi's etchings may have had a different impact than they have on an audience today. Today's viewers are more media savvy, but they also no longer have the daily experience of living among Rome's ruins. The natural question is, what exploration options does generative AI provide to understand what it uses when reproducing the geometry found in a drawing or image? Coming from a 3D animation background, the first assumption might be that the system creates or works from a 3D model after analyzing the image. However, many prompt explorations did not support that idea clearly. Even added perspective lines did not reliably place two simple cubes into the intended test setup when using consumer-facing generative AI. The next option is based on normal mapping, a technique typically used to relight objects or to fake surface direction on an otherwise mostly flat object. Several approaches were tested to produce stable results, but no repeatable results were achieved, even with varied prompts. In world space normal maps, red, green, and blue record directional information for a surface vector. The takeaway here is that the colors can indicate a certain surface orientation, but in generative AI, these colors are usually only reliable within a single generated result, not as a stable technical measurement across multiple generations. The next option is a depth map. In a depth map, values between black and white represent normalized depth information. The results also vary from prompt to prompt, but they can still provide an idea of how the image or drawing may have been interpreted by the generative AI. This helps identify whether areas with questionable perspective are seen as flat, deep, connected, or in conflict. A lesson from my architecture studies was to focus first on shape, then on material, and only then on color or paint. Shape usually changes last. Materials age. Paint may change, fade, or disappear completely. This raises several questions. What was the real color? What was the original decor? And what kind of light shaped the appearance of the interior? With generative tools, it is now possible to take the style of almost any art period and apply it to a visualization that might be used in a documentary. But, as mentioned before, the question is, how far can we go? And what does today's media-savvy audience need in order to understand or feel the intended impression? What visual memories do viewers bring with them, and how do those memories influence what they see? How can we provide an impression similar to what a Roman citizen in the 18th century may have experienced when looking at one of Piranesi's etchings? And how much of that impression can still be conveyed to an audience today? These questions can make or break the value of a documentary, especially if the visual approach is not chosen carefully for a specific audience and supported by enough contextual information. With our new generative options, it is easy to get carried away. Objectivity is not a simple state to achieve, if it can be achieved at all. The example shown here may or may not come close to the prison aesthetic and mood that Piranesi would create today. It is only an example, meant to support one's own thinking as a documentarist. It is not meant to be perfect, universal, or a best practice. Not at all. During this short exploration, only a few problems were examined, and only within a small area of the etching. However, the mindset behind the use of today's tools needs to be more careful than ever. It is easy to be carried away by bold visualizations that can now be created with almost no effort. For a documentary, that makes context, transparency, and restraint even more important.